China's coastal water pollution. According to China's latest official survey, pollution remains a serious issue along much of the country's 18,000 kilometers coastline. The 2022 State Oceanic Administration report revealed that over 80% of surveyed coastal areas suffered from heavy pollution, with contamination concentrated around major population centers like the Yangtze River Delta and Pearl River Delta. Decades of rapid urbanization and industrialization in cities like Shanghai and Ningbo have left surrounding waters choked with sewage, agricultural runoff, and industrial effluents. In Shanghai alone, over tons of wastewater containing oil, heavy metals, fertilizer residues, and pesticide runoff is discharged annually into the East China Sea, and up to 22% is untreated. The result is a large recurring 15,000 square kilometers hypoxic dead zone and frequent toxic algal blooms that pose threats to human health and marine ecosystems. The Pearl River Delta in Guangdong Province has experienced a similar environmental decline. The region's extensive petrochemicals, electronics manufacturing, and coal-fired power generation industries have caused heavy pollution of tributaries leading into the South China Sea. For example, excessive nutrient runoff has created persistent 22,000 square kilometers harmful algal bloom off the delta since the 1990s. Heavy metal and plastic accumulation in sediments also exceeds national standards by multiple folds in certain areas. Key pollutants found along China's coasts included inorganic nitrogen and phosphates from agricultural runoff and untreated municipal sewage, which contribute to eutrophication. Industrial effluents contain a toxic cocktail of oil, heavy metals like mercury and lead, pesticide residues, and emerging contaminants like pharmaceuticals and plasticizers. Overall, this reflects a decades-long trend of deterioration in China's coastal waters driven by rapid economic development without commensurate environmental regulation and enforcement. Plastic waste has become another highly visible and growing problem along China's coasts. As the world's largest plastics producer and consumer, China contributes up to a third of all plastic pollution in the ocean. The Yangtze alone delivers an estimated 537.6 to 905.9 tons of microplastics into the East China Sea annually. Microplastics were detected in all 21 fish species tested across Chinese waters, demonstrating the pervasiveness of this pollutant in marine food chains. South China Sea overfishing crises. Farther offshore, China's massive fishing fleet is causing an ecological crisis in the South China Sea. With over 17,000 vessels, China likely possesses the world's largest long-distance fishing fleet. However, lax oversight and loose enforcement has led to systemic overfishing and illegal practices throughout these waters. China has reported catching 13 million tons in the South China Sea in 2022, representing around 20% of reported world catches. Satellite data revealed hundreds of large Chinese ships fishing illicitly in North Korean maritime zones. Many utilized band gear like 25 kilometers long drifting gill nets and high-powered LED lights to maximize catches and evade patrols. As a result of such large-scale industrial incursions, North Korean squid stocks have collapsed by over 70% since 2003. In the contested Spratly Islands, satellite imagery consistently shows large fleets of Chinese fishing vessels anchored year-round around disputed reefs near Philippine shores. These 100-strong flotillas have damaged over many hectares of coral through ship groundings, anchor dragging, and waste dumping. They also likely serve a dual purpose as part of China's maritime militia. According to some analysts, experts say China is exploiting lax oversight, overcapacity, and state-backed fleets to assert control over waters and resources it unilaterally claims across the South China Sea. Estimates suggest Chinese government subsidies support around $3.55 billion, accounting for 85% of China's subsidies to its fleet are harming the sustainability of fish stocks. This subsidized overcapacity is severely depleting fish stocks region-wide. As nearshore waters are overexploited, Chinese trawlers are expanding into the exclusive economic zones of Southeast Asian countries. operating illegally and displacing local small-scale fishermen. Indonesia has detonated and scuttled over 500 such vessels apprehended in its waters since 2016. Reef destruction and other threats. South China Sea is home to about 177,000 square miles of extremely biodiverse coral reefs. There are an estimated 571 different species of coral in its waters and 3,794 different species of fish. But decades of destructive fishing methods, dredging, and pollution have caused substantial damage. According to one study, China has destroyed over 55 square kilometers. Cyanide and blast fishing have also wreaked extensive damage on the region's corals. Blast fishing employs explosives to stun and capture fish hiding in reef crevices, obliterating coral structures and marine life in the process. Though prohibited, it remains common due to economic incentives and weak enforcement. Cyanide poison is squirted to immobilize fish residing inside corals, killing the reefs in the process. These practices have decimated coral communities across the South China Sea. Mass harvesting of giant clams and other invertebrates represents another serious threat. Hundreds of thousands of giant clams are extracted annually, often by boat propellers hacking away chunks of reef. As vital ecosystem engineers, their disappearance impairs reef recovery and productivity. Cucumbers, sharks, and other species have been severely overexploited through similar destructive practices. Of course, the cumulative impacts of these threats have been devastating. Based on current trajectories, scientists estimate that over 90% of the South China Sea's corals could be lost by 2050 without urgent and coordinated action. The functional collapse of these reef ecosystems seems imminent, with potentially disastrous economic and social consequences. Of reef through its island-building activities alone, Chinese fishermen also have destroyed more than 100 square kilometers of coral. Exposing China hypocrisy when deal with Japan nuclear waste. China's recent protests against Japan's planned release of treated Fukushima wastewater are rife with hypocrisy. This feigned outrage attempts to distract from China's own abysmal record on nuclear safety and ocean pollution, but the facts expose Beijing's lies. Figures speak for themselves. Chinese nuclear plants recklessly dump astronomical amounts of radioactive water into the sea each year. The Qinshan plant alone discharged 218 trillion becquerels of tritium. The Hongye plant released 90 trillion becquerels the same year. Others, like Dawang, contribute similar massive amounts. Yet the Chinese regime conceals the full extent of its nuclear contamination with no transparency or international oversight. The true numbers are likely even higher. Japan's treated Fukushima water will release just 22 trillion becquerels over 30 to 40 years, a relative drop in the ocean compared to China's yearly dumping. Unlike China, Japan has gone to painstaking lengths to treat the Fukushima water and reduce radionuclides to safe WHO guideline levels. Chinese scientists were even invited to witness the treatment processes firsthand. Not that state media would mention this. Beijing ignores all reason and safety measures if it contradicts their nationalist agenda. But nuclear contamination is just the start of China's eco-crimes. Social media frequently expose pipes spewing thick black wastewater directly into seaside tourism spots. Videos from places like Qingdao and Dalian show the extent of uncontrolled industrial dumping in China, yet somehow Beijing still claims environmental credibility. The reality is Japan's Fukushima plan represents the least bad option available, but the Chinese regime twists any news to attack Japan. They actively poison their own waters with cover-ups and propaganda. The recent Xi'an earthquake highlighted the CCP's callous disregard for human life again. Meanwhile, Jinping claims in CEOP27 speeches that China is an ecological leader, utter drivel. If Beijing's officials genuinely cared for ocean protection and public health, they could start by reforming their failed governance at home. China hosts some of the most polluted seas on Earth, with toxic algae and dead zones spreading, but it's easier to cast stones in Japan than address industrial corruption. Do not expect honesty or progress from the CCP. For them, pollution and hypocrisy flow infinitely. In conclusion, China has zero credibility or standing to lecture Japan on Fukushima. Their state media pumps out propaganda to hide China's own eco-crimes, but the truth will out, and the facts reveal a regime dumping endless nuclear waste in secret while projecting outrage abroad. China is the reckless villain here, make no mistake. Environmental costs of China's actions. Severe environmental costs of uncontrolled overfishing are now becoming apparent across the South China Sea. Official reported catches have declined since 2000 even as total fishing effort and capacity continues rising. However, actual catches are likely 3 to 4 times higher than reported when estimated illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is included. These catches are completely unsustainable. A study found that total fishing effort in the South China Sea would need to be cut by up to 90% to avoid further depletion and collapse of high-value fish stocks like mackerel, tuna, and scad. Yet China plans to grow its fleet in the region by another 15% by 2025. Without bold reductions, irrecoverable fisheries collapses are imminent. Sharp population declines, and smaller fish sizes are already evident for commercially valuable species across the South China Sea. Large predatory fish biomass fell by 50%, remaining individual fish are now half the average weight. Indo-Pacific mackerel stocks were projected to reach total collapse by 2026 in one report. The fish has vanished entirely from certain regional ports. Scad populations could crash to less than 10% of 1950s levels within 20 years at current fishing mortality rates. The remaining shoals contain predominantly small juvenile fish. Hairtail, shrimp, grouper, snapper, and tuna stocks have all declined more than 70% since the 1950s within China's claimed waters and across Southeast Asia. Coastal fish populations in Vietnam's nearshore waters have declined by 80 to 90% over the past 30 years of industrial fishing. The giant clam harvest in contested parts of the Spratly Islands and Scarborough Shoal has declined over 90% in the last 40 years, mostly due to Chinese fishing depleting their abundant coastal reef habitats. Several valuable South China Sea fisheries have essentially become commercially extinct already under the pressure of uncontrolled Chinese overfishing. Region-wide, the annual catch losses from collapsing fish stocks could cost over $5 billion per year by 2045 if present trends continue. Other ecological effects include a proliferation of jellyfish due to the removal of planktivorous fish competitors, further disrupting fisheries. Declining catches of low-value trash fish also bodes ill for the practice of fish meal production to feed China's aquaculture industry, a major driver of overfishing. With coastal waters depleted, the remaining relatively healthy offshore stocks around contested islands and shoals will come under even greater fishing pressure. The vital coral reef habitats sustaining these fish populations also remain at high risk from destructive fishing, pollution, ship groundings, and climate change effects.